today, I guess an evergreen topic, it is theory to practice. And the reason we return to it often is because there's a lot to say on it, Rory. And I think more importantly, this is a question that is asked again and again, and it must be hundreds of times now on our Facebook group. So if you're not a member of that, come and join in the conversation. But this theory to practice, because we learn these theories, we're reading it from a textbook, it's telling us what the findings are. How does it relate to actual in-the-room practice, Rory?
It's a great question, Ken, and as you say, it comes up in our Facebook group. You'll find a whole host of people asking equally insightful questions. Just as a thought to start this idea off, Ken, I had a coin on my desk, and when it dropped off the desk, it's landed on the floor. No matter what part of the world I'm in, it will end up on the floor, because that is the theory of gravity. And gravity is a universal theory that we could all see in action. Drop a coin, it lands on the floor. And I think that sometimes the idea that theories are fixed and replicable all the time can be a little bit confusing to students. Now, I'll explain what I mean by that. We're not dealing with coins on the floor when we're working with clients. We're not talking about things like gravity. We're talking about human interaction. And I think when it comes to theory, the theory should be viewed like this. This is a possible outcome of what someone may have experienced. And it also may be a possible outcome. If you use this theory, that client may very well be able to move on with their life, feel better about themselves, be able to re-evaluate their lives and think of their ongoing journey in a different perspective. Counselling theories are just that. They are theories. Sometimes you have to leave the theory at the door when you've seen a client. Put the books at the door. As one of my supervisors said, put that book down and tell me about the clients. Because I was reading from a book in supervision and saying they're doing this, and she just gently took the book off me, put it down and said, tell me about this person, because every client is different. Every client's experience will be very nuanced. We all deal with the kind of experiences in life people have. What we have to do with theory is to try to weave it in, because no client will absolutely fit the theory 100%. Everybody is very different. How we apply the theory and understand the theory needs a real nuance that it might not be exact, but it might be on the theme of.
So I agree with you. I love this topic, and I think that a theory is a framework, and it's really useful having a framework. So if we go to person-centered theory and we look at the stages of development, it will be a framework that may help us in doing an assessment with somebody. It is some work that is done by another, usually scrutinized and peer-reviewed, often published. So there's the one side of it. It gives us a framework. The framework's not going to fit everyone, as you said, Rory. And it's very interesting. If you study the counselling theories, you will often hear the same wording and the same concepts described by different theorists. And it sounds like they're explaining the same kind of human presentations. So it's just somebody else's words or idea of crystallizing what we know as the human condition and how we react within that. Now, sometimes theory is more understandable in retrospect. I recall during my own training reading the counselling theories, finding them quite interesting, and there were certain things that I could see within myself. But there were also theories that didn't make a whole lot of sense to me, that I couldn't necessarily see acting out within myself until I was writing about those theories after being in placement with clients, where I had to link the client's presentations to the theories of the model that I was studying. And suddenly it started to make sense. I may have been able to say what the theory said, but I didn't have that felt sense of actually witnessing it in a client and seeing it happen. And I recall when I went to my supervisor, I was questioning person-centered theory. I was saying, but is it really enough? And then I had a client, and there was a massive shift in this client from nothing that I'd done except be with that person. They'd done all of the work. And I remember going, wow, I see it. I see this person growing within this theoretical model, and it made it more understanding for me. So if you are studying it in a textbook at level 3 and you haven't seen any clients and you're struggling to fully understand what that is, clients may show you and surprise you as you go forward, Rory.
Yeah, I think that it's only when you actually come to practice the theory, like music, you can learn to read music without actually playing an instrument. I think you could read music, but to appreciate music is a very different thing. And I think the same goes really for counselling. One of the things that really struck me as a student was that I would listen to clients before I'd fully understood the theory. And I'd go back and look at the theory and I'd go, that's what that is. That's the theory. And what the theory does is it gives you a vocabulary to make sense of it, to conceptualize what's going on. And this is the important thing about theory, to write about it in your assignments. You could write about it and say that this is what the client's saying, and this is the theory that would underpin it. But also, and I think more crucially, it gives you a vocabulary to discuss it with your supervisor and other professionals. So you can say, this is what the client said, and I think that's an interjected value. And at that point, something really wonderful happens. Either the person agrees and says, yep, I think you're right. Or they say, what else could it be? And you might think, yeah, it's something else. It has an aspect of that, but there's something else to it as well. And you're on the next journey of discovery with the theory. And as you go on to the next area of discovery, the next time it presents in the therapy room, you say, it might be this and it could be that. And that is how you link theory to practice.
Yes, and isn't it interesting that another great use for theory is getting through your assignments? Because how else can the academic establishment measure your knowledge of what it is you're doing? So they question you on the theory. So it shows that you know what you're doing. But like you say, Rory, when you're going into that session with the client, we're leaving the theory at the door, because what we're not trying to do is fit a client into a certain shape. But we may, after our session with a client, take those shapes and go, oh, that actually fits neatly over what I've just seen or how that person is presented. And it doesn't change anything other than gives us a framework to speak about in supervision, or like you say with a peer, or to do deeper research. And I think that's what drives research, is that theories are by their very nature very limited. You'll come out of doing research and have something that may be publishable, and guess what? You're adding to the theory. If you look, one of the questions you're going to be asked when you're doing your assignments, Rory, is explain the theorists that underpinned and influenced Carl Rogers, for example, because a theory is built on a theory is built on a theory. And it's interesting. And like you say, Rory, it's a framework, it's a scaffolding, very useful. Sometimes I think that the theories can be quite deep, and I can happily put my hands up and say, you know what, Carl Rogers's 19 propositions, I read over it and the wording is pretty heavy and it feels very difficult for me to get my head around even now. But I do know that if you look at them individually and try and decode them, you can go, aha, I see where that links in. But there's not a time where I'm going to be sat there in a session with a client trying to evaluate where they are within that theory. I'm being there with them in that moment. And it might be afterwards that I can go, oh yeah, that actually matches and maps to that theory. So I guess my question then, Rory, is this theory to practice something that eventually becomes just a subconscious process that plays out?
Yeah, I think it speaks to unconscious competence, where, like when you're driving your car or tying your shoelaces, you do it really without thought. The takeaway should be clients are not research subjects. We shouldn't sit in front of a client and treat them like something that we have to observe. One of the things that the research is absolutely clear about, no matter who's done the research, is the quality of the relationship. The relationship is a key indicator to positive outcomes in therapy. So if we park our books at the door and do what my supervisor did and just take my book off me, put it away and say, who is this client? What's going on for them? How can I be of better assistance? And I think if you start with that, the theories will just drop into place. But please don't go in the therapy room with a theoretical hat on, thinking that you're there to do an observation exercise. You're not. You're there to be a therapist, and you're there to try and facilitate that human being that's in front of you, their own journey, and help them affect a resolution to where they find themselves.